Social media is full of health advice, but have you ever stopped to ask how much of it is actually helping you? In today's episode, I'm joined by fellow NTP Fiona Smith, aka Heal with Fifi, on TikTok and on Instagram. If you guys follow her, if you don't, you absolutely should. And we are going to discuss why getting all of your health advice from social media can be risky. And this is coming from two people who primarily produce content to put on social media. So this is coming from two social media creators, and it is not because we are lying to you. It is because we cannot serve you in the way that you need, because social media advice is not personalized. It is not personalized, and we are unable to personalize it for you because we don't know you. We don't know how you reacted to the first thing. We don't know your history. And so we give amazing advice on Instagram, both of us do, and on she has 1 million followers on TikTok, so obviously she is well loved by the people, and people want to hear what she has to say. So in this episode, we dive into what Fiona talks about as pseudo root causes, which is the oversimplified or misleading narratives that often dominate Instagram and TikTok. And together, we are going to unpack why these can do more harm than good, and what you really need to focus on for long-lasting health. We are also going to talk about the fact that things in health, part of the reason why it's hard to give your full message on Instagram is because health is very nuanced. There's a lot of nuance to a lot of these things based on so many different factors. And so that's why we're going to talk about things like nuances of tolerance and how to navigate the overwhelming amount of conflicting information that is out there. In this episode, we are also going to cover things like insulin resistance, the hidden impact of histamine and gut health and mold exposure. So we're going to talk about all different really topics that I know that this audience really loves, and I know that this episode is going to challenge the way you look at health advice online, empower you to start trusting your intuition, and to focus on the foundational principles that truly make a difference. And I wanted to share that if you are listening to this episode and you've followed this show for a long time, you're wanting to work with me, I did want to let you know that Blood Sugar Mastery is open for a 23rd round. And if you resonate with what I share on social media, on my podcast, if you resonate with my content, chances are I may be the expert to help you navigate through this confusing world of nutrition and holistic healing, and all these new strategies that I've been sharing about optimizing your EZ water and circadian rhythms and how to block blue light and all these different topics. You would probably be a great candidate for Blood Sugar Mastery. And so I am leaving a link to schedule a discovery call with me in the show notes. And I'm also going to leave the link for the enrollment in case you have already been listening. You've heard me talk about this program time and time again, and now is the time you finally want to bite the bullet and sign up. I would love to have you join our group, but spaces are limited. So if you are considering this, I would really recommend signing up sooner than later because this program has filled up many times in the past. All right, so again, Heal with Fifi. Fiona is amazing. Make sure you follow her on social media, on TikTok, on Instagram, and I hope you love today's interview with Fiona. Fiona, I'm so excited to be finally welcoming you onto my podcast.
Hi,
Thanks for being here.
I'm so honored to come on. I've just loved your work, and I've listened to your podcast and so many episodes, so I'm so excited to be on.
Oh, yay. I'm so honored. So
Yeah.
I found you on Instagram, and your handle is Heal with Fifi. Everyone go follow Fiona. And I love just like how real you are and how you also talk about a lot of nuance. And I think that is so missing in conversations, especially on social media,
Mm.
where it's way easier and you'll get way more likes and clicks if you just say, no one should eat carbs or everyone needs carbs. Like, and I think I really love that you provide the nuance and this like realness in the social media space. So thank you for that. But I'd love for my listeners to just learn a little bit more about you and your journey. I know you mentioned that we have a lot of similarities, but so why don't you just take us through like what got you focused on your health and kind of doing what you're doing now?
Yeah. We definitely have a lot of similarities when I've heard you share your own story of like, I think you've said like carrying a protein bar around in your purse. Like I used to be that person too. So growing up, I had just a lot of like chronic digestive issues. Looking back, I lived in a home with black mold that likely was fueling some of that. Also like stress, trauma, antibiotics, 90s kid diet. Like I like to joke that I thought I genuinely had such a lack of nutrition knowledge back then. That I thought brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tarts were healthy because they were brown. Like that was my extent of nutrition knowledge. And I even remember like on the topic of blood sugar, I remember being a kid in class and like first grade falling asleep after having like 2 bowls of Lucky Charms, and thinking that I was just tired. Like I looking back, I just see so many, like in retrospect, you just see so many like blood sugar spikes and crashes. And I didn't have the language to like, put together that was what was going on actually until I went back to school for nutrition and started learning about some of this. So a lot of gut issues growing up, a lot of antibiotics, a lot of processed foods, like very 90s kid standard American diet. And then around the time that I got my period, like periods were very heavy, very painful, like literally would black out from period cramps. And it's funny because looking back, my mom has always been very intuitive, and she was like, take fish oil, like fish oil might help. And she was so spot on because we know fish oil decreasing inflammation can help, like literal studies to show fish oil can help with period cramps, right?
Yeah.
But I was like, no, I was a very different person back then. I'm like, you don't understand how much pain I'm in. I don't want the fish oil. I want the medication. Give me the medication. Like that was my mindset back then. And now I'm like, completely.
Don't touch me with that.
I'm like,
miss me with the medication, please.
Right. Like I'm not anti-medication, but it's like I'm very like hesitant and definitely do my research and don't go on medications willy-nilly by any means.
For sure.
So had really painful periods, really heavy periods. My mom didn't want me to go on birth control because she is very intuitive and she knew what was up. But when I got to college, I'm like, you know what? I can do whatever I want now. We're going on the pill. So went to get birth control when I was 18, and then things really took a turn from there. And I think a lot of people have a similar story with that, where birth control, it's like took the gut issues times 40, like explosion of food sensitivities, gut issues, mental health issues, depression, anxiety. I was having panic attacks every day where I would be driving to work, have to pull off the side of the road to have a panic attack. That just terrible anxiety that came out of nowhere, gut issues. And I probably shouldn't call it this, but I call it like the birth control to Prozac pipeline. It's so real. And it's like backed by, statistics that it's what, like, I don't want to say the specific percentage because I don't know it off the top of my head, but a large percentage of women that are put on birth control are later prescribed antibiotic or later prescribed
Prozac.
Yeah, Prozac and SSRIs.
Wow.
So was really dealing with a lot of like mental health stuff. And around the age of like 21, I decided like I have to do something about this. Like I have to do something about this. And I actually, it's funny because this is where there's so many parallels between our stories. I actually came across, I just intuitively, I'm like, I'm just going to type in like paleo podcast into Apple or Spotify, see what comes up. And I stumbled across like Balanced Bites podcast. And I think you've talked about them too.
Yes. Oh my God. When Liz asked me to be on that podcast, I'm like, Liz, you don't understand. You and Diane, like that was my podcast. That was like, it changed my life. And I felt like I want to be like hanging out and talking with you girls. I'm like, I feel like I could do this. And like, hello. And so when Liz asked me to be on her podcast, I was like sobbing and I left her this embarrassing voice note. I'm like, Liz, you don't understand. And now like I have Liz's number and we text. It's just like how the world
I love
it's just so
that.
crazy. Yeah. So Balance
I
Bites podcast, it's
Yeah.
still going on. Liz is still doing it. It's
Huh!
amazing.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I didn't know that. That's so
Yeah.
cool. Um, but yeah, I like stumbled upon that podcast, and actually, it was an episode they did with Dr. Jolene Brighton.
Hmm.
And I remember I was like cleaning my car, and I was still on birth control at the time, and she was explaining on the podcast some of the signs of like post birth control syndrome, and my jaw dropped to the floor. I'm like, this is exactly what I'm experiencing. Like, I've never heard anyone put to words like what I'm experiencing. And Dr. Jolene Brighton, if you've heard her story, she's
Hmm.
experienced like thyroid, I think Hashimoto's as well as PCOS. And when she was explaining her own story, I'm like, oh my God, that's me. Like, that's exactly what I'm experiencing. And at the time, like, also some thyroid symptoms were starting to creep in, a lot of fatigue, like tail of my eyebrow kind of disappearing, hair loss, weight
Hmm.
gain. Like, it felt like I was the healthy person. Like, I literally felt like I was the healthiest person I knew, but I like could not lose weight. I could not lose a pound. Like, was just,
Hmm.
if anything, just gaining, despite feeling like I was
Relatable.
doing. I know.
Yeah.
But looking back, and like you talk about this all the time, like the connection between blood sugar and insulin and weight, like how all of those things are so important, and we're never
Mhm.
taught about that, like never
No.
taught about that.
Yeah. It's just like
um
cut your calories and work
right,
out harder.
eat in a
Yep.
calorie deficit and just
Yeah.
like go to the gym 7 days a week instead of 5,
And you're
right?
like, well, my hair's falling out, so that doesn't feel like a good option for
Right, like
me.
a
Yeah.
4:30 a.m. wake up call to go to the gym before work, like
Oh
kind of doesn't sound like my body wants that stress. But okay.
yeah.
So that is how, I mean, once I listened to that podcast, because I also too, um I've always had a very strong intuition, and when I heard her talk about thyroid stuff, I'm like, that's it, that's exactly
Hmm.
what's going on. And everything in my health journey, I'm like, I've always kind of known, like no lab test has ever been a surprise to me, really, ever.
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like every test I've done, I'm like, yeah, like intuition has kind of like, it's kind of just proved what I feel like inner knowing has always
Hmm.
known. So then I remember I did like an at-home test for thyroid related stuff, and it came back weird, and then later went on to like go to a doctor and get actually diagnosed. But and then around, when was it, I went back to school with the NTA. It was during the pandemic.
Hmm.
And that's how I learned about it, was through the Balance Bites podcast too. So that's so funny.
Yes, that's because of Liz.
Yeah,
We're both sitting
because of
here.
Liz. I know. So I was like, well, I want to, like, I'd learned so much from like Beyond the Pill and reading books and listening to podcasts, but I wanted to have like formal education. So I went to school at the NTA, and I just, at the time, like had a very basic understanding of nutrition, like cut out gluten, cut out
Hmm.
dairy. Like, I thought going gluten dairy free would solve basically everything. And
Everything.
it,
Yeah.
it did helped a
Of
little bit,
course.
but there were definitely like deeper layers to what was going on. So I went back to school at the NTA, and then I like to joke social media has just been like adult show and tell for me. Like, I started posting in 2020 when this was not my career, this was not my job, and I was kind of just sharing for fun, like anything I had learned through
Hmm.
a book, a podcast, school. Like, I had to share it with other people. I'm like, this works for me, I have to share it. Like, this worked for
Yeah.
me. I feel almost a responsibility. Like, if this has helped me and I've been suffering my entire life, I have to share this with people,
For
because
sure.
this could change someone's life. So that's kind of how I got started on TikTok and Instagram, and it kind of evolved to, I went back to school at the NTA, and people were asking me like, do you offer coaching? I'm like, never thought of offering coaching. I'm working in a completely different industry. And that's how I kind of fell into this space. So that's like my
Wow.
long-winded spiel in
Yeah.
my story.
Amazing. No, I love that. And, it's very similar to me. And I feel that same thing. It's like as soon as I learn something that helps my health
Yeah.
or that, I don't know, it was a lot of this. I felt like we've been lied to
Yeah.
and, we're all trying our best. We're eating the stupid food pyramid. And
Mm.
yet I'm getting sicker and sicker and like people are dying and I was
Yeah.
working as a speech therapist and it's like I see people suffering all over the place and it was like I cannot keep my mouth closed. Like I feel this
Mm-hmm.
sense of as soon as I learn something it's like I have to share this with
Yeah.
anyone who will listen. My information is not for everybody. It's not going to help everybody, but
Yeah.
there are people out there who need this information, right? Like who need to know the the potential risks of going on the birth control pill
Mm-hmm.
and like that the fact that when you have hormonal dysregulation like I had when you are pre-menopausal really dialing in your blood sugar and metabolic
Yeah.
hormones, that is really the way to get those hormones back to balance.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously taking care of your stress and all that. But it's like I was trying to go in at it from the other way. And we learned in the NTA the foundations and
Mm-hmm.
how, one of the foundations is blood sugar, digestion,
Yeah.
liver, fatty acids, minerals. Like these are the important foundations. And I was working backwards before I did that. So
Yes.
I could never heal.
Same.
Yeah.
Exactly the same. I was like, oh, well, maybe I need to seed cycle and that's gonna help. Like that's the path I was
Same.
on. I'm like, guess I'm just gonna eat like handfuls and like I'm a bird, like of flaxseed and like,
Like I'm a
and I'm like,
bird.
why do I have gut issues? That's crazy. Like, girl, you're eating like 4 cups of sunflower seeds a day. Like, eat the meat. Just eat the meat.
Yeah, if you find yourself like eating 4 cups of seeds a day, you
Ugh.
might want to backtrack and
But I
and
agree with
consult
you though.
someone.
I agree with you. It's like I think a lot of people, and I think even just myself before I'd gotten, some structured education, we
Hmm.
get a lot of little bits through social media. And you're so great about kind of explaining like foundational health, but you
Hmm.
see a lot of quick things of like seed cycling for your hormones or
Yeah.
um, raspberry leaf tea for your cramps. Or like that's how I would kind of, it was kind of like green
Yes.
allopathy of like, your progesterone's low, so take this and
Take
take
Vitex.
take Vitex, right? Like
Yeah.
I did all of that, and while it may have gave me temporary relief, there were deeper, it was like putting a band-aid on a bullet wound. And I see that
Yeah.
a lot even in the functional medicine space where there's a lot of green allopathy where it's like progesterone's low, let's do this. Like this hormone's low, let's do this. And it's like sometimes those strategies are appropriate, but they're not really moving the needle forward as much as you'd like if you don't address foundational health. So
For sure. And I think that's what people don't know how to do, exactly like you said, by looking on social media.
right.
And that's, I know that it can be, a cost to work with a practitioner, but
Right.
it's really powerful. And although I learned a lot of information about blood sugar on my own and not from the Nutritional Therapy Association,
Yeah.
I really feel so confident that working with any person off the street, I could get them like 95% better.
Yeah.
Just like by what we learned in that program was so powerful and was
Mm-hmm.
really, really helpful. So I feel really thankful for that knowledge.
I
But
do too.
before we hopped on, we were talking about, I was like, what are you like, lit up about talking about
Yeah.
lately? And so let's start talking about this concept and this topic because I think it is so needed.
Yes. Yeah. The topic of do you want to switch gears into talking about just carbohydrate tolerance?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. So I'll just share, my what's going on with my own health journey because that's always
Sure.
inspired. Like again, social
Yeah.
media, adult show and tell. If I have
Yeah.
something like weird health
Hmm.
wise I'm going through, I'm sharing it on social media. I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing.
Yes.
So I got some labs back. And it's so funny because you'll think this is funny too. On social media, so many people were like, "That's your blood sugar's fine. What
Hmm.
doctor did you go to that gave you this information?" I'm like, Miss Girl,
Hmm.
my fasted glucose is like 95, 96. There have been times I've pricked my finger at home. It's like 115,
Mm.
that high. Um, and my fasted insulin's like 12 or 13. And all of these
Mm.
people online are like, that is perfect blood sugar. That is normal. Da 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 da. And you talk about this all the time. What is normal is not optimal.
Yeah.
What is normal is not optimal. I think it's anything less than like a fasted insulin of 18 is normal, right? Or less
Well,
than
yeah,
20.
something it depends on the lab, but like, yeah, they'll allopathic centralized doctors will say under 20. I want it under 5. I want it
Right.
like maybe maximum 6 if you're
Right.
non-symptomatic, but I have people who are symptomatic at 6 or 7.
Right. Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
nuanced. Everyone, and I work a lot with people with thyroid dysfunction. I see the same thing. Like
Hmm.
just because, a TSH between, 1 and 2 is
Hmm.
optimal,
Hmm.
everyone has their sweet spot of where they feel their best.
Yeah.
And blood sugar's the same. So I just think so many people and statistically we know this, it's like 92% of Americans, 88 to 92% of Americans are walking around with
93%.
93. Okay, great. Yeah. It just keeps getting worse.
It does. It literally does. I know. Every time they test it, it's like worse and worse. And it's an exponential curve. So it's going to be like it's going to be less than 1% soon. It's going to be all the people listening to this podcast.
All of America. All of America. Yeah. And I just think that, we should be keeping like even myself, I do regular blood work just so I can keep an eye on things. And I don't want to take action when I'm, they can diagnose me with pre-diabetes or diagnose me with type 2 diabetes. I want to take action early so I can prevent that from happening. But most doctors will not say anything until your labs are bad enough to actually help you. And that is such a disservice. That is such a disservice to people. Because if I truly think people want to do better, and most people do want to improve their health, but we can't do that if we don't have the information in front of us. So what is normal is not optimal. I hear from clients every day, my labs look normal, my labs look normal, my labs look normal, but I feel terrible. I feel so bad. Mm-hmm. And what is normal is not optimal. So for me, full transparency, I'm having a bit of a paradigm shift right now of like, I feel like everything I know is a lie type of thing. And it's been really interesting because I've kind of always been about balance and like, carbs aren't and I don't believe carbs are bad. And that's where the nuance is really important. Mm-hmm. But clearly I'm not like my carb tolerance, like, and you talk a little bit about like your carbohydrate tolerance and the nuance with carbs, that I'm switching things up with even my own eating right now. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people, I have clients coming to me saying, oh, there's nothing wrong with my blood sugar. I eat blood sugar balanced meals. Do you hear that?
Yes.
Yes.
People will say like, oh yeah, I always eat my carbs last, or oh, I make sure to have protein and fat first, or I make sure to have vegetables first. And I love that you're talking about this because that is not a guarantee that your blood sugar is going to be stable. It will help potentially a little bit. And, it's better than just pounding bananas and eating naked carbs all day. Right. But we need the protein, we need the fat, but I think when I put on CGMs and I really measured on myself, and I saw this with my clients, that this quote balanced meal it's not a healing strategy, mm-hmm. I guess you can say. So what's a balanced meal? Talk us through what it is that you were thinking and that you were doing, and like,
Yeah. So what's interesting is, and this is where I think blood work's really important, because when I've used CGMs in the past and I ate, blood sugar balanced meals, I didn't really see any like huge red flags when I was using a CGM. But I wonder, and not to like pick your brain, but with insulin, like insulin being high, could that have been the reason glucose was looking pretty decent?
Yes. So you may have had decent insulin sensitivity, but what we typically see is that insulin usually is rising for years before we see a change in glucose. So what tends to happen is someone will need like 2, 3, 4 times the amount of insulin, and the body is just compensating because it's like our bodies are such G's. Like they're just so good at keeping us stable and like compensating for deficits. So it's like, oh, like Fiona wants to have 2 apples with breakfast. Boom, here's extra insulin.
Right.
I saw you having 2 apples. I was like, ooh, that's a lot of apples. I'm like, I could never do that many apples. But I'm like, works for her. She knows what she's doing.
Yeah.
But it's like, like you think about trying to hit these macros and having like a balanced plate. So keep going. I have a personal story to share, but we'll keep going. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I've used CGMs and things like that in the past, but it's interesting to see that insulin. And it's also interesting that that's not routine blood work that people are getting. That's not a routine marker people are getting unless you are specifically asking for that lab work to be ran. So it was interesting because I think what a balanced plate, I'll give an example of like what I felt like it used to be and what it's changed, like my little paradigm shift I'm experiencing right now.
Sure, yeah.
I think we're kind of taught like a carb, a non-starchy vegetable, and a protein. And that is a balanced meal. So I'm thinking like maybe a piece of salmon, a potato, and some non-starchy vegetables. And someone commented on my Instagram recently something really profound. They said a moderate diet works for people in moderate health. Like a moderate diet works for people in moderate health. So if things are out of balance, does a moderate diet work for that person? Because for me, even eating, not eating, eating a very new, like I even had people message me saying, how are your labs this bad? Like, how are your labs off when you eat so clean? If there's no hope for you, there's no hope for me. I'm like, no, there's hope for you. Like, I'm just eating past my carb tolerance. And so, things that, and you talk about this all the time, that things that are going to influence your ability to tolerate carbs, high levels of stress, like will influence your blood sugar, your ability to tolerate carbs, lack of skeletal muscle, which I'm like full transparency, very under muscled right now. Like that will influence your carb tolerance. Even the time of year, which you also talk about, like time of year is going to influence carb tolerance. Were we meant to eat tropical fruit, pineapple? Like it's sending our body a very confusing signal if we're eating tons of tropical fruit in the winter. It's like, is it January in Texas or is it July in Costa Rica? We don't know. Like your body is just in this state of confusion. So I think all of these things are so nuanced, and the internet is just so black and white. And I don't know if you see this too. And I have clients coming to me saying, are carbs good? Are carbs bad? Are eggs good? Are eggs bad? Is dairy good? Is dairy bad? Like just very black and white. And I think that's very understandable because there's so much conflicting information that we get through social media. But at the end of the day, it is bio-individual. You have very unique needs. And I was just talking to my mom about this on the phone, that like the nutrition recommendations are wildly inappropriate for the vast majority of Americans. Like we are saying, like, have a big old bowl of oatmeal for breakfast for the vast majority of Americans. I was actually watching, I don't know if you saw the reels that came out around the Olympics, and they were saying, this is what this Olympian eats for breakfast. Okay. So it was like this Olympian sprinter, and he was having oatmeal for breakfast. I'm like, you know what? For someone who's an Olympic sprinter who's exercising for like what? Training for 8 hours a day, that actually makes a lot of sense for that person, because that's one of the 7% of the American population that's metabolically healthy. Makes sense for that Olympian. Does that make sense for Cheryl, who works in accounting, who walks 3,000 steps a day, that hasn't gone to the gym in 3 years? Cheryl. No.
She's sitting under blue lights. She's sedentary. I am sometimes Cheryl.
I am also sometimes Cheryl.
Yes. This is not judging Cheryl.
Not at all.
Cheryl's doing her best.
We love Cheryl.
And she doesn't, right, but she doesn't know. Like, she doesn't know that, that carbs are high octane fuel. Right? And so if you're sitting most of the day, which I am sitting most of the day, my steps, I was just like, oh my God, my step count is abysmal and embarrassing. And I talk about walking and how important it is. Yeah. And it's like to do all the self-care that we need to do. Like you see these memes and reels coming out lately of like people like cooking and walking on like a walking pad and like with the red light mask on and things like that, and just like multitasking all these things. Like it certainly feels like that. And, I work from home, and half the time, like, okay, I'm working outside and grounding at the same time.
Right.
And I'm, on my PMF mat and meditating and doing red light. Like, it's just like, I'm kind of like stacking all these things. You don't have to do all these things, but what you're talking about is like getting these checks. It's like, oh, I need to focus on this more, because things are just going to go out of balance, because we can't do all the things all the time at 100% capacity. Like I just see so many people just so overwhelmed, and, I relate so much to like burnout and doing too many things. And it's like, okay, like what is going to be like the most important thing for me right now? But, coming back to what you were talking about of like the carb nuances and like being under muscled, that's really going to impact us. So if you're not moving a lot and you don't have a lot of muscle on your body, you really don't have that much space to put all these carbs. So it's not that carbs are bad. It's just we don't have space for them. Right. So, the other thing about like building the plate in that way that you talked about, the idea of this like balanced plate, that's how I ate when I was eating paleo, right? So I went paleo, listening to the Balanced Bites podcast, and I was eating, let's say, like a steak and a sweet potato and broccoli.
Right. Right.
Like,
Same.
I'm like, that is healthy, that's clean.
Mm.
And I was like, why isn't this working for me? It's working for everyone. And I'm like, and I am eating these healthy foods. Like the steak is grass fed. It's the broccoli is organic. The butter is, whatever. Like it's regenerative and raw and like all these things. Like, so you can get the healthiest food. But it wasn't until I realized that for me, there were two big things that were coming into play when I was paleo. The first one was that I was having a lot of fat with a lot of carbs.
Yes.
So you're not skimping on fat. I wasn't skimping on fat because we know fat is good for you.
Healthy fat for healthy hormones. Yep.
Yeah. And it's great for blood sugar too. But it's really important that we look at fat and carbs as like this lever, right? Because it's energy. So what I needed to do was, if I was going to have a sweet potato with dinner, which I can't even believe I could have a whole sweet potato with dinner. And trust me, I polish off the entire thing. So we're not talking about just a couple of bites. I love sweet potatoes, still do. Rarely eat them because of what they do to my blood sugar, especially at night. So if we have a, giant portion of a dense carbohydrate, even if it's slow, don't even get me started on these like slow carbs, like
complex
it's hitting your blood sugar. It's whatever. But we have to then pull down something else. So maybe I would have needed like a sirloin steak and not have a lot of butter. You know what I'm saying? So like we have to tilt the scales. So, or go heavier on the butter, add avocado instead on the steak, and then take out the sweet potato. So that's putting up the fat, lowering the carbs. So it's like if we can think about using these energy levers and not going too high fat, too high carb at the same time, that can be really helpful. Do you see that too?
Yes. And I think I see a lot of people that come to work with me that they just want to like bang their head against the wall because they're eating clean and they're doing all the things and eating paleo and gluten and dairy free and cutting out the foods, but they're just not seeing the needle move forward. And I feel like this is not a remotely controversial statement whatsoever, that the worst way you can be eating if you have insulin resistance or anything blood sugar related is a high carb, high fat, low protein diet, which is standard American diet. But what I see is a lot of people do like a clean version of that. Do you see that too? Of like you said, like a ribeye steak, a sweet potato with butter, and like you're eating both high carb and high fat. Well, that would be like protein, but like a lot of high carb, high fat, low protein. And there's a lot of people are eating quote unquote clean, and they're like, why am I doing all of the things and I am not seeing the results? Well, like you said, you have to pull one lever or the other.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with that, and I see that a lot too.
Yeah. The other thing that for me, I realized now looking back, like, it's like hindsight, we can see all this apart, or we could see our story differently than when we were in it, is the fact that I started eating paleo when I lived in Miami. And I started in, let's say, like April, and I went all the way through almost like the winter. And then I went to New York. I moved to New York, and I was okay. I started there in like June or July, and I was eating paleo and I was doing okay. And as the months grew colder and the light started lessening, that there was a direct correlation between an increase in my body fat, delay in my period. And I was like, the same diet just healed me. And that's when I didn't get my period for 6 months. That's my whole PCOS story. That's when it started, is when I was in New York, and I never realized the light component. And so we're like talking about these seasonal carbs. It's like, these foods were probably okay for me for a really long time when I was in Miami, because I was so south, and the light and the food there was a match there. And so there wasn't
Mm.
that incoherence that we get when I then moved up to New York and I was still blending bananas in my iced coffee with like
Yeah.
coconut sugar. And
Coconut sugar.
yeah, I know. So it's like, I mean, eating dried mango slices and, again, like full sweet potatoes and maple
Yeah.
syrup. And it's like, well, it's paleo, it's healthy sugar.
Mm.
I really thought that for so long. And I never even thought about a carb. I was just like, I'm just eating healthy foods. And I was like, this is the best quality. This is clean. And so I had no lens of blood sugar. I had
Right.
no lens of that.
Right.
And then I also had no lens of the idea that, food contains light information and deuterium, which, we're not going to talk about on this podcast, but that's
Yeah.
partially the reason why my whole metabolism just like broke.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. Like you said, in retrospect, you can look back to New York and you're like,
Yeah.
wow. And it's so crazy you say that because I have off and on experienced like IBS, which I put in air quotes because
Mm-hmm.
it's like, is it IBS or, like for me, there were like several root causes to that.
Yeah.
But I always I've noted now in retrospect, when I look back, I'm like, oh, my digestion would always get worse in the winter when I did not change my diet. Like my diet would be like I'm the type of person where I could eat the same meal every day. I could eat the same
Uh-huh.
breakfast, the same lunch, the same dinner, run it on autopilot. I have my hyperfixations. I find something else. So that's how I would eat, and I would carry over what I was eating in the summer to eating in the winter. And I'm like, why is it every November I get a terrible digestive flare, and I'm doing everything right? I'm eating clean. I'm doing all the things. And I wanted to call out something you said, which was so important. You were like, I was eating healthy paleo carbs,
Mm-hmm.
coconut sugar, maple syrup, sweet potato. It's like,
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, even from like information on social media, we think that, if you just pair the carbs with the protein and the fat, you're good.
Mm-hmm.
Eating 40, 50 grams of carbs with a meal, you pair it with protein and a fat, there's some fiber in there, you're good. But the reality is, we're all very unique, we're all very different. And things need to be tailored to you based on your carbohydrate tolerance. And the reality is, the very, very sad reality is most Americans have a very poor carbohydrate tolerance. And I heard Dr. Will Cole, I don't know if you follow
Mm-hmm.
him, on a podcast recently, and he said, like, you have to meet your body where it's at. So
Mm-hmm.
if you have a literal intolerance to carbohydrates, you need to meet your body where it's at. So on my journey right now, I'm not going to get too much in the weeds because I like to say I'm like my own guinea pig, and I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
you feel this way too. I like
Oh, yeah, for
love
sure.
trying things on myself, seeing what works, and I just feel like, especially my client work, I have to try things on myself before I introduce it, because I'm like, if I need to make sure I can do this before I coach other people. But I'm playing around with just like lowering my carbohydrate intake
Mm-hmm.
to meet my body where it's at. So I'm upping
Mm-hmm.
fat. Like you said, it's like a lever. If you bring down carbs are an energy source, but fat can also be an energy source. So if you bring down carbs, you have to up fat.
Yep.
And that's another thing too, when people do, I know in the past, when I like, when intermittent fast, like, do you remember like 2014, 2015? I feel like keto and intermittent fasting was like a really big fad. I knew not, I was just like, oh, this is something I saw on social media. Let's try it. Let's not eat our first meal till 2 p.m., do a HIIT workout, wonder why my skin's breaking out, go to the gym, not eat breakfast, not eat a meal till 2 p.m., have a Dunkin' iced coffee and some pre-workout and wonder why I feel terrible. Okay.
Pre-workout.
Okay, like the Alani new pre-workout, literally.
I can't
like,
believe I'm having panic attacks.
it's so weird. Like, it's such a mystery health
It's such
symptom.
a mystery.
It's a mystery.
Yeah,
like,
for
crazy.
sure. I know. I want to make a post that says like 2018 called and they want their advice back. It's like,
yeah,
we need to stop, the skipping breakfast and stuff for
exactly.
a lot of people. But I want to go back to what you said about like meeting people where they're at. And
yes.
recently I've discovered kind of that there's almost like there's three categories of people when it comes to their metabolic health. There are people who are optimal, and we know that these are people who, it's only like 7% of the population. They're probably quite active and have a decent amount of muscle on their body, maybe not visible, but the quality of their muscle is good and insulin sensitive. And these are people who can tolerate a lot of stuff, not have to really think about it because maybe they're so active, whatever.
Right.
Then we have people where you're sort of falling in this category, Fiona, and this is where a huge percentage of the population is in more of the high blood sugar, high insulin, and high leptin category. And so basically that's the way I understand it is kind of like we've had almost like a summer metabolism, like way too long, like too much
Yes.
abundance,
Yes.
right? So the body's like, okay, like, should I store? I guess I should be storing all this. And like,
Right.
so it's putting you in this like that higher category, right?
Right.
And then there's another category, which is low leptin,
Yeah.
potentially low to normal insulin, and lower blood sugar. It doesn't always match up exactly like that, but oftentimes these people are the ones who are having blood sugar crashes. They can't really go long between meals. They don't feel well if they're intermittent fasting. Maybe they don't feel good if they're lowering their carbs. It's kind of like their
Mm.
body has been too stressed. And so if we look at, let's take out the healthy people because they're fine. We're not going to talk about them. So now if we have our sort of the low and the high category, I think the idea of like, maybe the healthy people, let's bring them back for a second. They're the ones doing fine with the balanced plate.
Right.
7% of the population, right? So let's
Yep.
throw that out because they're fine and they can eat their balanced plate and good for them. But now the people who are in this like high leptin, high insulin, high blood sugar place, we need to do strategies to bring those things down. And
Mm-hmm.
that's where things like circadian aligned intermittent fasting comes in, where cutting carbs, ketosis, we need to give this realm of people more of the winter metabolism. And guess what?
Mm-hmm.
Right now, it's actually somewhat biologically appropriate for you to have like this little bit of insulin resistance after
Yeah.
fall, after this
Mm.
harvest season. So if you think about it, this is when there was the harvest. And so it was like sweet potatoes and apples and cranberries and all this, Thanksgiving foods and things like that. And we're actually supposed to become a little bit insulin resistant at that time
Mm.
so that over the winter we can tolerate things like fasting and ketosis. Because think about it like a squirrel getting fat if they're gonna hibernate for winter. I'm not saying you're fat, and like, but it's like we're like storing. That's what like
Mm-hmm.
this is doing. It's like we're storing away like higher blood sugar. We're like storing energy,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're coming into a season where there is supposed to be scarcity. So it's like
Mm-hmm.
our body is preparing for the scarcity. But like most Americans, and like you said in the past with the winter and what I was doing in New York, the
Mm-hmm.
scarcity never came. So
Right.
my blood sugar, insulin, leptin or whatever did not come down. Instead, it just stays high, and then
Right.
people go on to develop diabetes. So, right now, it's really seasonally appropriate for you to lean
Mm-hmm.
into these strategies like, fasting and circadian aligned, meaning
Yeah.
skipping a dinner or like an early dinner.
Mm.
And then, cutting down carbs, adding more fats, like not eating between meals, getting out in the cold,
Mm-hmm.
really amazing for insulin sensitivity. And then
Mm.
the other group of people, it's kind of like their body, the low leptin, low insulin, low blood sugar people, it's like they've been experiencing a winter metabolism for too long. So
Mm.
it's like these are the people who have historically been over fasting, over exercising, like over working out, under eating, like
Mm.
carb restriction for way too long. So obviously their body is getting this message of like, oh, it's winter. Okay, still winter. Okay, it's still winter. Okay, we're running from tigers, lots of stress, lots of famine, lots of
Mm-hmm.
scarcity. That's that message. So I
Yeah.
tend to work with a lot of people who fall in this category.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as big of a percentage of our population, but I see it a lot in like the biohacker space where people from since 2018 they're skipping breakfast and they're like intermittent fasting and they're doing all these things because it's healthy and they should, but we need to start making a distinction. It's like, are you in this summer metabolism, like over like abundance
Mm-hmm.
position? Because then, yeah, do those things, but don't stress your body out too much, but
Mm.
start doing those things. And then the other people, it's like, then we want to send them signs that it's safe, food is abundant, we're not going to be fasting, we may be eating more often, may be eating more carbs, we may be taking out workouts, adding in gentle relaxation. So that's how we bring the leptin and stuff back to normal.
Yeah.
So it's like it makes sense that we would kind of float the line, like, so
Mm-hmm.
you're not pre-diabetic, but
Right.
it's like the pre that you're like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I gotta work on
Right. Like
this.
there's work to be done. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people, I think if we're getting a lot of nutrition information from social media, which a lot of people are, we see, and to bring it back to what you said about the 7% metabolically healthy, they're one group. We're not going to talk about them, but I want to talk about them for a second because they're the people
Yes.
on social media that are
Mm-hmm.
giving nutrition advice.
Mm-hmm.
The 7% that are metabolically healthy are the people that I see dispensing nutrition advice. And they are
Mm.
giving advice. Someone who's lifting weights 5 times a week and has a ton of muscle on their frame and they're eating a cookie, they're like, you can eat the cookie. Like, there's nothing wrong with eating the cookie. And no, you're not going to burst in flames if you eat the cookie. Like, you're not a bad person if you eat the cookie. But we need to understand the nuance of if you're taking advice from someone who's been metabolically healthy, that's never had PCOS, that's never had insulin resistance, that's never been had any type of metabolic issue. I see almost this lack of empathy in the nutrition and personal training space because it's like, well, you should just be able to lose weight because I was just able to cut my calories. I was just able to da 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 da. And it's not to say calories aren't part of the equation, but it's to say that 7% that's metabolically healthy is dispensing information to the other 93%. And that's a huge issue that I see every single day. Every single day I open up Instagram, Reels, TikTok, every day.
I am so glad you said that because there's so much, and I don't think that they're trying to be this way.
Right.
I think that they just really don't have the lived experience. So I'm going
Right.
to give every single one of them the benefit of the doubt. And it's, I know, for example, there's someone in my family who has been able to maintain their weight by like portion control
Mm.
and, being active and just cannot understand like what I have to do because it's
Mm-hmm.
totally different than what they do.
Mm-hmm.
There's just this,
Mm-hmm.
it just doesn't, there's no connection. It's like, well, can't you just
Right.
do this exact thing because it works?
Right.
And so
Right.
I think that when someone doesn't have that lived experience like we
Right.
do, again, giving them the benefit of the doubt, what ends up happening though is that it is like basically gaslighting people's lived
Mm-hmm.
experience
Mm-hmm.
and making them feel like, oh, I should just be able to do this. Like, what's wrong with me that I
Mm-hmm.
just can't eat a cookie and be okay or just stop at one? Or
Mm-hmm.
like, what's wrong with me that I'm not even eating a cookie and I'm gaining weight and all these people they're fine. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that it can be a really hard thing to encounter and it feels like really insensitive to
Mm-hmm.
people's lived experience that
I
you
agree.
know it's I think it's a really hard thing. It's like a heartbreaking thing for me to see as well because it's just like, oh God, like I know you're so excited that like you can just eat a cookie and not put on weight, but it's really diminishing to other people's lived experience. And I just want
Yeah.
to say to everyone listening, like that's never been my experience. And so I'm sure it's not been yours either. And so, you're not wrong for not being able to just eat the cookies and
Yeah.
still gain weight and like do the 80/20 and like that should work for you. And it's like, but I'm not metabolically healthy, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful like point there for sure.
And I think also to the people listening, like, we believe you if
Hmm.
you are going to, because that's the thing too, is I see this a lot. Again, I do see a lot of gaslighting of like, well, you're just not working out as much as you say you're working out, or you're
Hmm.
secretly eating something that you're just not putting on your food journal, and you must be lying about how much you're eating because if you really were eating this little, you'd be losing weight.
Mm.
And I see that a lot on social media. And the nuance, because we're here to talk about the nuance. The
Hmm.
nuance is statistically the average American is consuming around what, it's like 3,600 calories a day. The average American is
Oh,
consuming.
really? I didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Uh,
lot.
yeah, but like, I have a feeling the people who listen to your podcast are not the average American, right? Like the people who follow me, my
They're
people,
probably under eating like 1,200
right?
calories.
Right,
Yeah.
like my people that come to me are not running through a Wendy's drive-through 5 times a week. Like that's just
No.
not. And if that's you, like that's okay. We love you. We're here to support you. But also, like,
That's not the
it's
people who
not that,
find this show.
right, like the
Yeah.
people who are finding your show are not the average American, but that
Mm-hmm.
is also real. Like that's where the nuance is like if someone's eating, 3,600 calories a day and they're not moving, yeah, like that's going to lead to weight gain, 100%, 100%. But also, I think all of these things matter. Like all of these
Mm-hmm.
things matter, where your blood sugar plays a role, your thyroid plays a role. And I work with people where I've never once doubted, like, are you lying to me about how much you work out? Or like, are you lying to me about how much you eat? Because you should be losing weight if you're following this plan to a T your trainer made for you. Like, I've never in my life have I worked with someone I'm like, this person must be lying to me. Like, I just think it's
Oh.
so interesting. And again, I just think it's like a lived experience thing where
Mm-hmm.
it is really hard to empathize or even understand if you haven't experienced like any degree of, of metabolic related issues. So that's just going back to the
Mm-hmm.
Olympics example. That Olympian that's having oatmeal for breakfast, they're like muscular, they're flexing their muscles, they're like, look at me running, look how fit I am. An Olympian eating oatmeal for
Yeah.
breakfast. The comment section, there were like people during the Olympics that were copying, like, if this Olympian says oatmeal is healthy, if they're not demonizing oatmeal, I'm going to eat oatmeal. Meanwhile, you walk 3,000 steps a day and you sit at a desk for most of the day and you don't have skeletal muscle on your frame. Is that an appropriate breakfast? And that's where
Not
we
for
have to ask,
Cheryl.
right, not for Cheryl. And that's okay. It doesn't mean oatmeal is bad. It just means, is that an appropriate option for you? Is that a health promoting option for you at this point, at this phase in your health journey?
Yeah.
And it's allowing yourself, like the whole theme of this conversation is allowing yourself to be flexible. It's not healthy, in my opinion, to go on, like, let's say you're intermittent let's say you're eating one meal a day for 10 years. Does that make sense? Like, some people are like going very extreme, like, again, fasting, like, it's signaling to your body that it's winter for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of people are giving their body the signal it's summer for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be flexible and be open to changing and be open to shifting and living. I always say, like, we can really overcomplicate health, but it just goes back to nature. Just looking outside, what is nature giving you?
Mm-hmm.
I like to say Mother Nature gives us what we need when we need it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
if we think about the fall, let's say we get like squash in the fall. What does squash have? Beta carotene, right? For the immune system, vitamin C for the immune system. And maybe, like, you have to ask yourself, again, the point of this question is asking yourself, is that an appropriate choice for me? But if it is an appropriate choice for you, you're getting the beta carotene and the vitamin A, which is what supports your immune system, right? As we go into cold and flu season, which I say in air quotes.
Yeah.
So isn't that crazy? Mother Nature gives us exactly what we need when we need it. Exactly what we need when we need it. I also think of the spring. In traditional Chinese medicine, they say spring is the time of the liver.
I love
and
that.
that's where, like, I will have, like, this last spring, I was like, oh, I'm definitely feeling that anger come up, because, like, anger is associated with the liver.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
I have had that after coffee enemas, like anger, insane. I've had several clients message me about that too. They're like, I got really angry, and I was just like, or they're like, I've been really angry lately, and I've been doing these castor oil packs. I'm like, that's good. Feel it, get it out. So yeah, keep going. That's totally a real thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, they say in traditional Chinese medicine, they say the liver is like suppressed emotion. Then think about the role liver plays in blood sugar.
Yes.
So also looking at that emotional root cause too, which I'm really in, that's also another thing I'm really into right now, of like helping people shift energetically, not just physically. Because I think so often we're so hyperfixated on like supplements, testing, protocols, food, blah, 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 blah. But it's like, there's always, I truly, truly believe there's an energetic root cause to almost every physical ailment on the body. And I love, and that's what Ayurveda believe. That's what traditional Chinese medicine believe. That's what these ancient modalities of healing, they never severed. You would never, ever, ever go to, an herbalist thousands of years ago and they would just give you some herbs. It was like, okay, but tell me about your trauma. Like, tell me about, and that's where it's like very holistic, So in the spring, I'm like, wow, I feel just really pissed off for no reason, like season of the liver, right? And if you go to the farmer's market, and I live in North Carolina, I'm very blessed to have a year-round farmer's market here. Like, there's a much longer growing season where I live compared to living up north where I was before. And going around my farmer's market, there's so much green, like dark leafy greens, which support the liver. So it's like Mother Nature gives us what we need when we need it, and what's in the winter, what's available. And I always like to say too, it's like, it's not like you're going to burst into flames if you eat, a tropical fruit in the winter, but it's just asking what is appropriate for you What is appropriate, and kind of blocking out the noise from social media and blocking out the noise of what 100 million other people are saying, and listening to nature and listening to your intuition.
Girl, I was just talking to someone on a discovery call about this. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
she's like, well, this person's saying this about fasting. And I was like, well, how does it feel in your body? I think that
Mm-hmm.
people are so afraid to listen to themselves because other people are smart and make good points and they have a platform on their phones,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's like, just because I say something doesn't mean you have to do it. Just because Fiona says something or
Exactly.
Dr. Mindy Pell says something, it doesn't mean that it's the right thing for you at
Right.
this moment. It's like the idea of saying, like, is this good or bad? That's too simplified. Is
Mm-hmm.
this good? Is this good for me right now in this quantity, right? Like, we
Right.
have to get more nuanced, and then we have to ask ourselves, how did that feel? How do I feel the next day? Is this resonating with me? Does this feel too hard? Does it
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'm forcing something and not getting results? Like, a lot of times, if you're like really forcing it, it's probably not right. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I always want to empower people to listen to their intuition more. Like, like, there's so many times, if something's not right. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I guarantee there's a supplement that you are taking right now that you could probably say, like, I don't know, like, I heard it was good, that you probably don't need, like
Mm-hmm.
something like that. Like, I get people that today I got someone off a list of, like, I swear to God, Fiona, it was like a 4-page list of supplements. I I was like, choose 5. I'm like, we're choosing the 5 most important.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
like, I got her off of, like, there had to have been, no lie, like 25 to 30 supplements. And it's like, why are you doing this? And she's like freaking out more and more. I'm like, this is the thing. We all have to take a collective deep breath
Mm-hmm.
and be like, we're going to be okay. Like, are you getting these people, like, people just so, like, worked up? It
Mm-hmm.
just, like, I want to give you all giant hugs. Like, we all need to just,
That's
like,
how I feel too.
right? Yeah.
I just think a lot of people get really fearful and anxious about their health for good reason, because it's serious.
It is.
Like, and
Mm-hmm.
you talk about this all the time, that like your metabolic health is so serious, and it's something people should be taking extremely seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Because poor metabolic health, we know, is linked to like non-alcoholic fatty liver, Alzheimer's, stroke, cardiovascular disease. Like, if you want to take any health issue and make it worse, metabolic issues. And people know this, but I think there's a big difference between approaching your health from a place of fear
Mm-hmm.
versus, like, it sounds very cheesy, but like fear versus like love for yourself.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are so scared that, like, it's almost like we're walking a tightrope, and if you take one step off of the tightrope, your health is going to explode. And that's where we have to get out of that mindset that if I eat one wrong meal, or if my supplements aren't perfect, and if I take one
Mm.
supplement out of my routine, if I do one wrong thing, I'm going to fall off the tightrope and my health is going to explode. That's
Yeah.
not how health works. It's like I always say, your body can handle acute stressors. It's when we have these chronic daily stressors that we're going to have issues. So I do see a lot of that. And I always say to my clients, like, come up with your core 3 or like core 4 of, like, for me, that's a B complex, a fish oil, or like a cod liver oil. Like, I have my core like 3 or 4 that I'm always taking, like foundational
Mm-hmm.
things. And honestly,
Mm-hmm.
most people, if you're eating a nutrient dense diet, most people shouldn't need more than that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do see a lot of that too, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So, is there anything else that you feel just kind of revved up about lately, passionate about, things that you see, like, with your clients, themes, anything you could think of?
Yeah. Well, I actually wanted to go off of a point you said about listening to your body and listening to your intuition, because
Mm-hmm.
I just think we are taught, I was talking in my stories about this today, like, we are taught to look towards authority for answers. So Danny is
Mm.
an NTP, so she knows better than I know. So I need to get my answers through her. And I can already tell you're a fantastic coach. You guide your clients, you give them the tools that they need. But I think a lot of people are like, give me the meal plan, give me the supplements, just tell me what I need to do. I'm so stressed about this. I don't want to think about my health anymore. Just tell me what I
Mm-hmm.
need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you're bypassing listening to your body and listening to your biofeedback. So
Yes.
I'll give an example of fasting. For me, when I fast, or I have fasted in the past, for too long, I get really cold. Like my hands and feet.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Me too, Fiona.
Yeah. Yeah,
Me
my
too,
hands and
and that's
feet
why
get
I
like
stopped
ice
fasting.
cold.
That's why I stopped fasting. I'm like, why can't I get warm? I'm like, oh, I'm fasting too long. Yes.
And I think that's very common. I see that so often in people with like thyroid dysfunction.
Yes.
Because I truly
was like, this
think,
isn't good for my thyroid.
right. And
I've never heard anyone
intuitively,
else talk about
yeah,
that.
like my hands and feet, if I am too crazy with that, like my body will let me know. And that's okay. Maybe that's a tool someone else uses, but it's not a tool I feel intuitively super drawn to go ham with, you know?
Yes.
And there's going to be things, that's something people should pay attention to. And what that feels in your body, like it feels very like exciting, expansive, like, oh, I want to learn more about that. When something's right for you, it doesn't feel like I have to learn this out of obligation or like this is something I really should learn. It feels like really exciting. If that is something you should be pursuing. So maybe that's like getting light throughout the day, taking light breaks, getting outside, seeing a sunrise, like there's certain things that you are just going to be intuitively drawn to, or like different accounts you're going to feel intuitively drawn to because you're meant to hear that information. But a lot of people have never, ever, ever been taught to tune into their own bodies, because if you're listening to this, you are the expert of your own body. You are the expert of your own body. And we want to outsource that intuition to every person on social media. And that's where people getting health information is going to feel very confusing because you'll find 80 different people saying 80 different things. But use your intuition and find what's aligned with you and try things, and don't be afraid to get it wrong. Like, don't be afraid to get it wrong. Like fasting, for example, hands and feet get really cold. I can tell intuitively my body does not like really, really, really crazy long fasts, and that's okay. Like I can be a healthy person without doing that. Not every tool has to be for you. And that's where I just encourage people to have a relationship with their bodies where they can tell, okay, my body really likes this. It sounds very like woo woo. If people only knew how woo woo I am in real life, they would be like, oh, homegirl's crazy. But like, I'll be taking supplements and I'm like, wow, my body just intuitively is like thanking me for taking that. You know, like for me, that's like magnesium and like NAC. I'm like, oh, my body I can feel my body thanking me for taking those supplements. And there's other things my body's like, could take it or leave it. And I encourage people to like ask their bodies for what it wants instead of outsourcing your intuition to people in positions of authority, because we are taught to do that. The medical system teaches you how to do that, right? Yeah. Doctor knows best. Don't question me. Just take this medication. Just take the medication. Yeah. You know, in school, listen to the teacher, listen to, you know, and we need certain structures in place sometimes like that. But at the end of the day, like we are never, ever, 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 ever taught how to listen to our own bodies. Yeah. And that's a skill that we need to cultivate. And you're not going to cultivate that skill if you're just copying and pasting what other people are doing on the internet, you know?
Beautifully said. I mean, people in my blood sugar mastery program, they're like, well, how many carbs should I eat? I'm like, I don't know the answer to that. And they're like, what? Like, and I was like, but here's how we're going to find it out.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, we are going to have to find out. We're going to have to go and we're going to have to explore, and we're going to use these metrics to kind of tell us. And I want you to tell me, how did you feel? How does it feel in your body? How long were you able to go between meals? Did you feel a crash? Were you energized? Like, did it feel enough? And all of a sudden, like, then they're doing it for themselves. You don't need me. I'm just guiding you as to like the questions to ask, the symptoms to tune into, maybe some numbers that might be helpful. But overall, it's in you. You know, right. Like the CGM is a really great guide, but I have people, you know, they're like, I think I'm going to not put my next CGM on. I'm like, I love hearing that, because what are you going to do instead? You're going to tune into your body and say, can I take what I learned from the CGM and now really turn inward and say like, ooh, I think I may have spiked my blood sugar, or like, ooh, I don't feel like I ate enough today. Like that is what I love to see with my clients, this deep learning and this trusting of their body. And I understand that when you're eating like a standard American diet and you're, you know, under blue light all day, like eating processed foods, like your body is not sending you clear messages.
Right.
So it's harder to listen to. But, you know, you start eating healthy foods and things like that, and your gut bacteria start shifting over, and you can start listening more and more, and you know, not outsourcing this knowledge that you have. So yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
so agree. I love that. Really important
Yeah.
topic. So
Yeah. And yeah, even with blood sugar, it's like, for me, it was a game changer to know, like, I do. And we normalize these things. We're like, I just crave something sweet after every meal. And that's
hmm
just my personality. I just
oh, that
have a
was me.
sweet tooth. Like, I just love sweets. It's like, but could that be like your blood sugar crashing and you're craving that little something sweet? And that's like, the crazy thing is, I think a lot of people don't even acknowledge that these are issues because it is so normal in our culture. Like,
hmm
everyone is dealing with this. Like, everyone is dealing with metabolic issues. It's an
Yeah,
epidemic. So it's like,
for
how
sure.
would we know? Just because something's common doesn't mean it's normal.
Yeah.
And we kind of brush these things off. Even for me with like digestive issues, everyone in my family had gut issues. My mom had gut issues. My grandma had gut issues. So like, why would I think? I just thought it was normal. I just thought it was normal. I didn't even
Mm.
think anything different. So I think a lot of people like grow up in environments where these things are really normalized, or we live
Mm.
in a culture these things are really normalized. So we're just very severed from our intuition and our biofeedback.
For sure. And this is a new topic, but you mentioned it earlier offline that you wanted to talk. We were talking a little bit about histamine, and that's something that's come up quite a
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of the symptoms of histamine issues overlap with hypoglycemia issues, which is really interesting. And like
Huh.
all of a sudden, I'm like, oh my God, I wonder if like a huge number of my clients are having like what's the role of histamine? So did you want to talk a little bit about your experience with histamine?
Yeah. Oh, I
Okay.
love this topic.
Okay.
Um, so for those that don't know, like the symptoms of histamine related issues,
Mm-hmm.
I'll share like a little bit about what that looks like for me and what I see in my clients. So, and again, things I normalized, watery eyes, sneezing, a lot of anxiety, like anxiety that
Mm-hmm.
felt like it came out of nowhere,
Mm-hmm.
heart palpitations, um, even like looping thoughts, which is really interesting. Like, if I'm feeling especially histamine around ovulation, because that's when estrogen is spiking and histamine spikes. So if you notice you feel really bad around ovulation and you actually feel worse around ovulation than you do at any point in your cycle, which is funny because everyone on social media says you should be able to run a marathon when you're ovulating. You should feel so good. You should feel so social. You should be doing the hard workout. It's like, for a lot of people with histamine issues, that's when they feel their worst. But I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people, we get this information. I don't want someone to hear this and go, well, that's me. I have
Mm-hmm.
histamine issues. But why do you have them?
Mm-hmm.
Because that is not a root. It's like a pseudo diagnosis, and
Yeah.
it's like a pseudo root cause. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot social media is filled with these pseudo root causes of histamines. I found it. That's my root cause. That's the thing. That's the thing I've been missing. But why? I always say, to find your root cause, you need to ask why until you cannot ask why anymore. And that
Mm-hmm.
is how you find your root cause. So my
Mm-hmm.
body's making too many histamines. Okay, let's get curious about that. Why would it be doing that? Because a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people genuinely have this relationship with their bodies where they feel at war with their bodies. My body's working against me. My body's betraying me. No, no, no. Every single thing your body does is to keep you alive and to protect you. So why would your body didn't just wake up one day and choose violence. Why is your body making too many histamines? Like, it's not for no reason. Well, if you have leaky gut, intestinal permeability, your body's just going to make more histamine. So that's the first thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the second thing is, we know things like past mold exposure can trigger things like histamine.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to a lot of your work, we know mold. What does mold do? Damages mitochondria. Every
Mm-hmm.
form of mold damages mitochondria in one way or another, which can lead to, it's like basically mitochondrial dysfunction. If you just want to make anything in the body not work, like mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yep.
Um, so that is a root. And then we also have chronic stress and trauma. When you're in, I feel like that's the root of the root of the root of like every single thing.
Mm-hmm.
When our bodies are kind of stuck in fight or flight, we are going to make more histamine. And things like vitamin mineral deficiencies can be linked. We need certain vitamins and minerals to break histamine down to fuel our DAO enzyme, like bioavailable copper, vitamin C. So, and also what we were talking about, I think a nerdy little anecdote, like clinical pearl when I'm working with people, is I'll always ask people like, where's your ancestry from? Like,
Mm-hmm.
where does your family come from, like in the world? Because if we think about it, seasonal eating, a lot of high histamine foods are things like avocados, bananas, citrus, oranges. My Irish ancestors would have exploded if they saw a banana tree. Like that just wasn't, and was that a restrictive diet that they didn't have access to bananas? No. Like thousands of years ago when different cultures didn't have access to, Asian cultures not having access to dairy, was that restrictive? Were they intentionally trying to restrict dairy? No, they just didn't have access to it. Like different people around the world ate different things, and that's something I've just intuitively felt drawn to like diving into, of like, what would my ancestors have been eating? Because like we say, oh, my ancestors ate steak. It's like, but everyone's ancestors come from different places. So to say like my ancestors is so funny, because it's like we all kind of come from different areas of the world. So anyways, the high histamine foods, if you have this bucket that's full of like histamine, and you add a little avocado in there, you add a little citrus in there, for me it would be like a little lemon in my water, and my eyes would look red. Wow. And that would trigger like a histamine response. So it's not that cutting out lemons and cutting out these foods necessarily gets to the root cause of the problem. It's more so that there's deeper like roots to dig into. So that's been a little bit about my experience with histamine.
What have you found helps your histamine besides avoiding some of these foods?
Yeah, so
because I know that like avoiding histamine foods forever, that's not healing or addressing some of the issues, right?
Yeah, and I've personally found, a lot of my clients find, they can add in some higher histamine foods back in very slowly. But really diving deep on gut health, because if you have histamine issues, it's highly likely you have intestinal permeability or leaky gut. So that's something I think everyone needs to dig in. What I'll say, my nuance, is that a lot of gut healing foods are high histamine. So I was wondering why am I making a big pot of bone broth? Why am I'm doing all the things to heal my gut. I'm eating sauerkraut. I'm making homemade bone broth, and my eyes are watering, and I'm puffy, and I'm swollen. I remember one morning I woke up, and it literally, my face looked like it had been stung by bees after drinking bone broth. And my boyfriend at the time was like, "Oh my God, like, are you okay?" And it was a histamine reaction. So it's just, that's the nuance that I really do recommend working with a practitioner, because there's so many, gut health is not just like, eat these 5 foods and you'll heal your gut. It's very deep and layered and nuanced. And I usually recommend testing to see what's going on in the gut. But working on gut health, eating more foods rich in bioavailable copper that fuel the DAO enzyme. So I'm a really big fan of like beef kidneys specifically. I know that's very niche, but really good source of copper. And I also really like a nervous system regulation, honestly. Like that's a really big piece of things and that's been like my Achilles heel this entire time, of like, that's always been my weak spot, but we're working on it. Like 2025 is our nervous system regulation era. So we're working on it. But I would say those are some of the biggest things. And then again, it's interesting too, when we think of seasonal eating, because that's what your podcast is about. Like the high histamine foods, should we be eating bananas, citrus, avocado? Like those are all the tropical fruits, right? That are high histamine. Doesn't make sense for us to eat those in the winter. Not, in my opinion, not necessarily. You're not going to, again, burst into flames if you eat a little bit of avocado in the winter. But at the end of the day, does that make sense from, that perspective? So also too, we talked a little bit about this before we started the live, but I have found and that's another piece, mold. I see mold trigger histamine issues so often. I see that to be one of the number one. It is. I almost never meet someone with MCAS or histamine issues that hasn't been exposed to mold at some point. And that's not to say mold is something we should fear. It's like, why is our body not getting rid of that? Why is that kind of like sitting on us and we're not able to detox that? So that's something you could work with a practitioner to kind of unpack. But I do see that go hand in hand. So for me, I did have to leave like my last apartment. I had to wait till that lease came to an end. And had to, do a lot of research to find somewhere. And it's almost impossible, I feel like, nowadays, to find someone like somewhere sterile, like completely void of mold, but you do the best you can. And so I would say those are some of the biggest root causes. Going back to that's what sorry, I'm going on a loop, but the mitochondrial dysfunction that's triggered by mold. What supports mitochondria? morning light exposure, grounding. Like, isn't that
Mhm.
cool that nature gives us everything we need? Like, truly, nature gives us everything we need to heal. So, in my mold protocol, I've like made for myself, and I include this in my clients' protocols too.
Mhm.
We're not just doing supplements and testing, they're grounding, they're getting light exposure, they are connecting with nature because that supports mitochondria. And when you are exposed to mold, that's why we can have every symptom under the sun: gut
Mhm.
issues, brain fog, migraines, joint pain. I see a lot of blood sugar issues and mold exposure too, because mold
So
really
many.
impacts the liver. So
Mhm.
anything that supports mitochondria, light
Mhm.
exposure, grounding also
Yeah.
is really, really helpful. And I found that to be helpful with histamines too.
Yeah. So, yeah, you said the grounding was really helpful for your histamine issues. And
Yeah,
that's,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, part of that goes back to cellular hydration.
yeah.
So, I learned from my teacher, Carrie Bennett, that the mitochondria make exclusion zone water.
Mm-hmm.
And that water is this charged water, and it's called the exclusion zone because it lines all your cells. And when the water is in your body, it's obviously not liquid. Like I'm not walking around like a bag of water, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even though we're 99% water by molecule. So the water separates into its charged particles. So we have the negative part with the electrons, and that's called the exclusion zone. And it excludes everything that's not an electron.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing can get in there. And that exclusion zone is so important for protecting our cellular health. It
Mm.
lines all the different crevices and things in our entire body,
Hmm.
including like around the mitochondria. So this water is like the key to health. It's also polarized. So it's like a battery because there's a negative zone and a positive zone. If you stick an electrode in, it lights a light bulb. So this is our potential energy battery.
Hmm.
And when we ground, we pull in electrons. The mitochondria use them. They go down the electron transport chain and create ATP and cellular water. So the
Mm-hmm.
grounding makes your mitochondria produce the water that gives you this cellular hydration. And that's
Mm-hmm.
also why sauna is so helpful for detoxification. It's not only because we're sweating, but it's because the far infrared light in the sauna expands our exclusion zone.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like a really cool thing that, and the sun, there's different types of light that do that as well. Obviously the sun has far infrared in it as well. And so that's why, the sunlight and grounding piece is so cool
Mm-hmm.
because when there's cellular dehydration, it triggers a cell danger response, which releases histamines. So that's where that comes from.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
So it's
I feel like
cellular dehydration. Hmm.
wow. I'm glad you brought that up because you just made me think of something else too. I don't know if it was you that sent me this article about EMFs and histamine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think you were the one that sent me
Yes.
that email.
Yes.
And I have also, and this is just like, I'm my own guinea pig. I try things. I'm my own lab rat. I love trying
Yeah,
things on myself and seeing like what works, what doesn't. And that's what I encourage like other people to do listening to this.
for
Try
sure.
things out. Don't just listen to people on social media, copy and paste. Try things out. See how you feel. Notice these things. So, this room that I'm in right now, I call this
Hmm.
the no EMF zone when I'm sleeping. Like I think a lot of
Yeah.
people get in this habit of like sleeping with their phone on their bedside table, sleeping with
Hmm.
laptop, technology, Alexa, like all of the just like microwaving themselves with
Alexa.
EMFs in their room. And I
Yes.
have found personally that that's helped so much with histamine symptoms, which makes sense. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yes,
Um,
because EMFs are dehydrating
mm-hmm,
to our cells. So they destroy the exclusion zone. So they
mm,
do the opposite, and the EMFs can trigger a cell danger response.
mm-hmm.
And that increases histamine. So that's how the EMFs raise your histamines. And so making your bedroom like this sanctuary, turning off your Wi-Fi at night, doing all those things and
Mm-hmm.
getting grounded, that can really, really help with the
Yeah.
histamine stuff. So yeah, amazing. And I also relate to I was doing a mold detox protocol, and I was getting allergy symptoms, and I'm
Yeah.
like, WTF, this is part of my before story. Like, why am I having allergies? I'm grounded all the time. I'm in the sauna. I'm in the sun. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so for me, I had all those bases covered, but like
Right.
something was happening. So I was like, just go back. Like, if you were one of your clients, I'm like, my small intestine. Like, it was just like, I was like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
because, and so obviously, like, for me, I'm just doing my, betaine and making sure like I'm digesting well before I get to the small intestine. But then I did some small intestine support and some like
Mm-hmm.
immune support in there, and like gone. And
Yeah.
I'm like, what? And also slowing down the detoxing, because it's like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that was just too much for my body.
Too
It
much
didn't
too
want that.
fast.
But yeah, it's just amazing that like how quickly our body can heal when we really get it right and tune in. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
amazing.
And what you mentioned about small intestine, I see a lot of and again, to get your root cause, you have to ask why until you can't ask why. A lot of people will
Mhm.
say, I have SIBO. I have SIBO, I have SIBO, I have SIBO. I've been treated for SIBO 100 times. And I work primarily with people with chronic gut issues, and
Mhm.
their gut issues are then triggering hormonal issues and thyroid issues.
Mhm.
And so what's interesting is, like, with small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, there's a huge link to histamines. Like, your body is just going to overproduce histamines if you have
For sure.
SIBO. But
Yes.
what's causing the SIBO? Like, we have to ask
Mhm.
why until we can't ask why, because your body didn't wake up one day and choose violence. Your body didn't wake up one day and said, let's just have this bacteria in the small
Yeah.
intestine. Let's just have it growing in the wrong place. Like, there's a reason for
Yeah.
these things. So that's where working with a practitioner can be really helpful to determine what your root causes are.
Did you listen to my episode with Joanne Kennedy? She's from Australia. It
No,
was a
I don't think so.
You'll have to listen to it because she talks all about mold. Like you might listen to her and want to study under her
Mm-hmm.
because it sounds like this is what you're doing, and it's like
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to be. She was like, "Oh, if you want to study, like she has a practitioner program." And I'm honestly like tempted because I just keep seeing people with these issues, and I'm like, I
Mm-hmm.
have to stay in my lane. Like I have to refer out. I have to refer out. So it's good to know that you're working with people with these issues, because I see this, I see it a lot. I see it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And she talks about the connection between things like actually oxalates, which was not
Mm.
really on my radar, but oxalates, histamine, mold, and SIBO. And
Hmm.
like she talks about that whole you're gonna love the episode. But anyway, I love this conversation, and I feel like we could go on forever.
I
But
know.
yeah, so you work with people. Where can people find you? Your
Yeah.
Instagram, TikTok. You have 1 million followers on TikTok?
Yeah, but TikTok's getting banned, Miss Girl.
No, I don't see it happening. But are you serious? You have 1 million followers? That is
Yeah, and what's
amazing.
what's crazy is I with TikTok, it was never like meant to be. I think that's why like TikTok has grown, because it was never meant to be this thing of like, I'm posting to talk about my
Yeah.
business. It genuinely started from a place of, I'm learning things about my own body. I'm trying things. I'm going to share it. Let's see if other people know this, and let's see if I can, just get this information out there. So I started posting back in 2019. Um,
Amazing.
and I love the platform. I also think it's brain rot to a certain extent, and like our
Hmm.
attention spans are just getting like so short, and it can be
I
really
know.
toxic. But
I won't
also,
let myself on there
yeah,
because I'm like, I'm already addicted to Instagram. I don't need something else. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, wow.
But I mean,
Congratulations.
thank you, thank you. I mean, if
Yeah.
TikTok's still around, my handle is the same on Instagram and TikTok. It's just heal.with.fifi.
Hmm.
And you can find me on Instagram for sure. TikTok,
Yeah.
if it's still there.
Yeah.
So you can find me at both of those places.
Amazing. Well, and do you have a website, or people just contact you through there?
Yeah, so my
Okay,
my Instagram's the best place. If you go to my
sure.
link tree, it has information on how to work with me.
Perfect. Love it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah.